Move that the Carter Observatory Act Repeal Bill be now read a third time. I've listened with interest to the contributions in the House tonight, including those from members of the Select Committee, and I know many of them will be taking call during the third reading. And may I firstly, in fact, acknowledge the work of the Select Committee, who actually sought submissions on the bill and received submissions from the Wellington City, the Carter Observatory and indeed the Auckland Stardome. And the officials, of course, did an excellent job in advising the committee as well. So can I say, Mr Speaker, that everyone was supportive of the bill, and indeed everyone is looking forward to it passing into law. The general point has been made that in 1938, under a former government, I might note, that the Carter Observatory was established as a national observatory. And at that stage, that was appropriate. And I remember when I was down in Wellington as a student many years ago, going up to the observatory. I must say at that stage it was noteworthy, and we're talking many years ago now, it was somewhat of a careworn state. And the reason for that was this. Already by then, and we're talking in the 1970s, astronomical research in New Zealand had effectively transferred to Mount John, and with a number of participating universities. At that stage, the most sophisticated instrument in New Zealand was the 1-metre telescope at Mount John. Today, in fact, as a result of a collaboration between primarily the University of Canterbury and Japan, the principal instrument there is the 2-metre telescope, which is primarily involved in the search for extrasolar planets and has indeed been very successful in that regard using the micro-lensing techniques. It's been observed, in fact, by Sue Kedgley, that New Zealand doesn't have a specific allocation of money for a national observatory. That is because our funding system, through the Foundation of Research, Science and Technology, and through universities and through international collaborations, effectively achieves that purpose. And we now have a fine collection of instruments suitable for a country of our size at Mount John. In addition, there is the collaboration of the University of Canterbury with the SALT telescope in South Africa, and the last year and indeed this year, the New Zealand government is partnering with the Australian government to acquire, to be established in New Zealand, the Square Kilometre Array, which of course is about radio astronomy. If we are successful, if the two countries are successful, that will be a hugely important initiative. It's one of the global science projects. We are in a science competition, if you will, primarily with South Africa, and that decision will be made in 2012. In fact, I'm going to the Netherlands next month to assist Senator Carr in the joint Australia-New Zealand presentation to advance our case in that regard, and the New Zealand government is committed to funding in that regard. So I wanted to mention those issues to show that, to demonstrate that actually through successive governments of both sides of the House, that there has been a commitment appropriate to the size of New Zealand to astronomy, both radio and optical, but that is no longer appropriate for the Carter Observatory, given the nature of the instruments there and indeed its location in a city situation. As I indicated in the second reading speech, I had the pleasure, in fact, along with a number of colleagues, to go to effectively the reopening of the observatory. And there's been Wellington City and the Carter Institute have done an excellent job, in fact, in refurbishing and restoring the facility, not just the instruments, but also displays, libraries, the buildings, and so forth. And it will form an important educational role for people both young and old, and in addition a tourist role. That involved a contribution of $2 million from the government to enable that to take place, and the Wellington City Council is committed to an annual expenditure of $300,000 to enable that facility to continue in operation, because, as I think has been reasonably noted, you can't run an observatory just on donations and the whatever payments that people make. It does require the commitment of society for societal good and benefit to ensure these kinds of public good facilities do exist. And this is part and parcel of the life, the cultural and intellectual life of Wellington. As I noted earlier in the proceedings on this bill, that Wellington, I think, can justifiably make claim to being one of the finest, smaller cities in the planet, in large part due, in fact, to the richness of its cultural and intellectual life, and the commitment of the City Council, led by, very ably in fact, by Mayor Prendergast, and in this instance in relation to the Carter Observatory, Dr Alex Shaw, to promote the life of Wellington. And it was not a surprise to me to read that it is one of the best places, the best place actually, city to visit in New Zealand in the winter. I guess talking about the winter means people have to specifically concentrate on the intellectual side of life rather than perhaps the sporting side, and of course the observatory, the art galleries, the museum and so forth. Yes, you can play sport in Wellington, that's true. There is an excellent stadium down here as well. So, Mr Speaker, can I say it is with real pleasure that I speak as Minister of Science as for the transfer of the observatory from the government to the city. Can I also say, as Minister of Science, that the government has put a particular emphasis on science, and we made it a particular priority in the budget. I've heard various comments from the opposition in regard to that, and they make various claims that they could have done more and so forth. They seem to have forgotten a few things. One, there was a global recession. Two, their initiatives weren't perhaps quite as well targeted as they could have been. And three, in fact, it is a question of also taking the science system along with the funding as well. And I think one of the important initiatives, and I understand well accepted by the opposition, is the innovation of the Chief Science Advisor to the Prime Minister, being a real fillip, I think, to the science community generally, and has helped put a substantial level of shape around science policy for New Zealand. So, Mr Speaker, in closing, I think, along with the House, generally, I think it's a real privilege to be able to be present in the House some 72 years after the initial establishment, that we have now recognised that Wellington is no longer suitable for a national observatory, and that we are transferring it from the Crown to the City Council.
Members, the question is that the Carter Observatory Act Repeal Bill be read a third time. I now call David Shearer.